Hey everyone, welcome in. We're excited to be here today. Please feel free to share where you're calling in from in the chat. We'll give maybe a minute or two before we get started here.
Hi, everyone.
Awesome. I am located in Canada. I think I'm the only Canadian on the rally team so far. Maria, do you want to share where you're calling in from?
I am in Denver, Colorado.
Awesome.
So
Which I think
shout
is
out to
only
anybody that's Denver.
Love it. And I think are we an hour difference or two, me and you? I think just an hour.
I don't know. I forget where we landed with that. I think it might be an hour or the same,
Yeah,
but
we're
definitely
close
not
enough.
like the rest of the rally team because
Yeah.
like New York.
Yes. Awesome. Welcome in, everyone. My name is Sydney. I'm our Senior Product Marketing Manager on the Rally team. Really excited to chat with Maria, who is with us today, who is a senior researcher at Checkr, and she leads enterprise product research and has a specialized focus on AI-powered democratization of the research process. So super excited to chat with you today and learn from you, Maria. So yeah, I will pass it over to you to introduce yourself and maybe share a little bit about what your team is focused on at Checkr before we get started here.
Yeah, that sounds great. Thanks so much for having me on. I'm Maria. I'm a senior researcher at Checkr. Checkr is based in SF, but we have offices in Denver and Santiago, Chile. I'm here in Denver, and I work on a research team for the whole company, a team of two. And currently, we're sort of split with an enterprise focus and a self-serve growth focus. I cover the enterprise side of things. Checkr is a background check product that serves HR professionals. Their workflows get incredibly complex in hiring. So that's sort of the area of the business that I cover. We're more focused on strategic research at Checkr within our research organization, but we do support and democratize the process around usability testing, product discovery. So we support lots of product managers, marketers, and designers. So it's definitely been a fun journey, and I've been here for 4 years, and yeah, always looking to continue to grow. So very excited to kind of start a conversation here and learn from others as I connect with more people as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Maria. And yeah, I'm really, really excited for this chat. As everybody who is here today knows that we are chatting about how Maria built and launched an AI chatbot specifically to help PMs and designers and researchers get more out of the research process and reduce that bottleneck on research operations to have to be answering those questions. Looks like we have really people from like all areas of the world joining in today, it looks like, which is super awesome.
Yeah,
I
that's so
also
exciting.
started this poll just to kind of see who is with us today. So it looks like we have a good breakdown of researchers and research ops, as well as some other folks. If you have sort of like an interesting role outside of what's listed here, feel free to share it in the chat
Nice.
just so we know who's here. Awesome. All right. So let's get started. So Maria, maybe before we even get into the chatbot specifically, can you share more on your philosophy with AI and how this even
Yeah.
came about?
Yeah, so I'll pull up a quote that is very popular in the AI space and in AI debate, but the quote basically says, like, I want AI to do my laundry and dishes so that I can do art and writing and not the other way around, which I think resonates with so many of us who debate the role of AI. It's a valid sentiment. I think we all desire technology to serve us and not reduce our capacity for expression and creativity. And I really like to view this quote more as like a metaphor for operators. I think that we have a choice in how and where we want to deploy AI and the freedom to experiment with this technology to better understand it. And I feel some responsibility on that level as well. And I found AI to really like help my creativity, especially in areas where I struggle, like coding, very succinct exec summaries. I really struggle with writing succinctly and the tedious aspects of research. So, in general, I think it's important to know how and where to deploy AI to increase capacity rather than just sort of using it to fully replace cognitive ability. I think there's more studies coming out about, you know, how AI can impact our cognition if we're kind of like overusing it and then getting into those like sort of cycles. But I think it's particularly useful for me, at least, with overcoming analysis paralysis, helping me get started, simply offering like a good second opinion on some of my findings. So my approach today really involves like finding high value work that's being disrupted, or repetitive, disliked workflows that sort of like feel like doing laundry, and then experimenting with AI solutions or AI or other technologies to kind of help alleviate that.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing this quote. There's a few folks who have heard it before, but also people who haven't, and so I think it's really important to share this.
Yeah,
I think it's like it's interesting because I think like we as researchers or research ops have the control over what we allow AI to do and to not do. So I think it is worth
right.
sitting back and considering this of like what parts of your role do you enjoy and what parts of the role do you maybe not enjoy that could be automated or that could be supported with AI. So yeah, I think this is a really great quote to like frame our conversation today.
Yeah.
So, when you think about like before you built this chatbot, can you tell us about the problem that you were facing initially and what kind of downstream impacts that had?
Yeah, definitely. So our two-person research team, like I said, consults across multiple product lines and teams. Checkr's even actually completed a few acquisitions lately, and while we don't formally support some of those companies, we end up like consulting some of the designers and PMs from those companies. So Allison, my counterpart, and myself are very busy. We're also responsible for handling our own strategic research. Um, I'm sure at least half of the audience can resonate with what I'm talking about, given that half the audience is research. But we handle a lot of questions regarding study setup, usability, tools, external recruitment, managing and issuing budgets for incentives, things like that. And then also even like our past research. So we're kind of like frequently distracted. And that was really sort of like the problem space I wanted to focus on.
Yeah, that's super interesting, and I think a lot of teams can relate to that. So I'm curious if there were like, yeah, again, before you built this chatbot, were there ways that you like tried to solve this problem first?
Yeah, so we had a standing research office hours meeting, which worked well for a bit, but ultimately it mostly received very few signups, and we would still receive a ton of questions over Slack and one-on-one, like quick meetings. So we eventually actually canceled the research office hours, and we continued to kind of like help people all over the place, and then made centralized research support and research insight Slack channels. I would actually often miss questions posted there unless someone tagged me directly. So I wanted to create a solution that would allow PMs, designers, and marketers to kind of like get their questions answered more quickly and without disruption for myself. Yeah, so that's what we tried first.
Yeah, that's I think the approach of trying, yeah, like some kind of an office hours meeting is super interesting. But yeah, it's interesting that that didn't work out because I feel like people want answers like on their own time or when they're like
Yeah,
in the
exactly.
moment.
Mhm.
Yeah, so it's like when if they have to wait for a meeting, they might just be like, whatever, like I'll figure it out.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's super interesting. And then how did you know that it was that like an AI chatbot could potentially solve this?
Yeah, so what really happened, I think, was Allison and myself were both out of office at the same time, and it actually really blocked a few individuals because of how much we hold in our heads and how many different things we manage on our own. And even like we have a pretty complex tool stack, so that, we'll use components of tools for different things, and it can just be hard for people to understand that without our guidance. So that's sort of when I began thinking about addressing the problem with a more scalable solution. And then as I learned more about AI agents, Checkr is very AI forward. So we're deploying AI in a lot of different contexts internally. And Allison and myself were both part of a generative AI task force that did a lot of testing of various AI tooling, really scoped appropriate problems to deploy that tooling to. So had some background there, and then thought that this would be a really great space to potentially deploy a solution for and experiment with. And then, we've just observing AI support in other contexts, I figured that like with sufficient training, this would be an effective solution.
Yeah, totally. I think that's really interesting that it came about because like you and your colleague Allison were both out of the office at the same time. And then I think
Yeah.
that's like, yeah, that's like really interesting that it's like you feel like you can't take a vacation and that other people can get their questions answered if you're
Yeah.
gone. So yeah, that's that's kind of funny that that sort of led to you thinking about how can we get people the help or like the support that they need without you even being there. Were you skeptical at all before you started to like learn more and more about AI?
Yeah, I mean, I've been following the AI space and debate a lot, so I definitely have had my own reservations, and that even like I've been using it for a couple of years now, and I think that, like, as I've deployed it in other contexts, I've absolutely seen hallucination happen, and that made me nervous just because, you know, um, that's obviously something that we wanna prevent. When we talk about hallucination, it's sort of like coming up with things that aren't even from the, like, window of context that it's been provided, so it's coming up with its own inference or, you know yeah, it's just pulling something that's potentially totally false. So I felt like this was like a low stakes context to apply it to. I think it's higher stakes when you're doing this with like research analysis. And I think that applying an AI solution in a lower risk space is actually a really good approach because then you can start to learn the technology and how the training works and then have more confidence to apply it, in more high risk areas. So I'll talk about more about training in my demo and kind of show that to an extent, but I was definitely skeptical.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And I think that's natural. I want to pull up this poll that we launched just to kind of share how people are feeling about using AI in research workflows. So a good majority
Nice.
already are. Some folks are looking to experiment, and there's definitely some people who are skeptical about it for sure.
Right.
So yeah, I think this is really interesting, but I'm curious, Maria, are you like surprised at all at this response?
Not really. I mean, I think this lines up with what I've heard as I've talked to experts in the AI space. I think that a lot of the limitations people face are potentially actually more around like what their organization will allow and you know, like I said, like Checkr is very AI forward. They're allowing us to like expense various AI tools, deploy solutions. We just have to be really careful with PII, anything dealing with any like personally identifiable information, like really cannot be fed into these models. And we have to sort of take appropriate measures to make sure we're using the right tooling that will prevent that from happening. So I know that like it is, I'm in more of like a startup kind of mindset organization, and I know that it can be very, very challenging to get started at other organizations, but that's part of why I wanted to show that this example because I think this is a pretty low risk application, and it's a good way to show like it's a good way to build expertise and then also show value to your team in a way that's like a little bit more straightforward. So
Totally. Yeah, I think that's kind of the like, and I mean, I know that how long did it take you to build this chatbot? Like not long, right?
no, it was like half a day of work, and then the real time is spent, I think, training it, making
Yeah.
sure it's evolving, like assessing models,
Yeah.
and how to kind of like update that. So I think it's for this particular use case, it did not take me very long at all because I used a no code solution.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's really interesting. Like, I think when you're talking about sort of like the bigger picture of being able to prove
Yeah.
like value for research ops, but also value for AI and like lower
Yeah.
lift AI use cases that are possible without like needing to take up a lot of time. So this is super exciting. I know we're going to get into the demo of what this looks like, but I wanted to pull up this comment from Zara just because I think it's super exciting. So they say, +1 to minimizing disruptions. We're encountering similar challenges as ReOps professionals. They've implemented office
Yeah.
hours, provided toolkits, and still find ourselves needing to address these questions directly in one-on-one on a one-on-one basis. So yeah, super excited to pull up this your AI chatbot solution. So before we do that, I have one more question for you. I'm curious, how should we start to think about chatbots for this specific use case?
If I could drive one point home, I think it would be to avoid over engineering AI agents, like really try to focus on simple and direct solutions for straightforward use cases, kind of like this one, to prevent analysis paralysis and ensure like very clear return on investment. I think it was MIT that came out with a little bit of new research kind of claiming that a lot of AI investments at companies are not showing ROI. And I think that we all know, AI or otherwise, like a lot of initiatives get spun up. And if you make the scope too broad, you don't have a clear problem that you're trying to solve. Like, really, if you're thinking about the best product development best practices, and you're applying those frameworks, like, that's really the way to go. I think you get into trouble when you're doing a lot of the over engineering and trying to make an agent do too many things. So, um, hopefully that helps answer
Yeah,
that question. Cool.
totally. I think it's easy to like get overwhelmed as well when we start to think about like all of the use cases that an AI chatbot can support with and what kind of data sources we should be pulling in and like how information should like come out and who needs to see it. It can feel like very overwhelming. So I really like that advice of kind of like scaling it down, not over engineering, and then I know you mentioned as well when we were chatting before, like finding one specific problem that a chatbot can solve. So I know we'll get into that in this conversation too.
Cool.
Amazing. So, drum roll, everybody. Let's get into it. Can you show us what the chatbot looks like from the researcher perspective and how that works, or PMs and designers?
Yeah. Yeah. So from the stakeholder point of view, what I want to show is a few screenshots of how it's been deployed in Slack with like real questions and answers that it provided. So the first one that I'm showing was, I think, the first question ever submitted, from a product marketer named Sydney, who is really like a Rally evangelist. Another Sydney, yes. And she actually knew about Rally before even coming to Checkr, which was great. Like, she's really well versed in trying to get a lot of people into the tool. And she, in this question, was asking how to get a newer PM at Checkr a Rally seat. And I think this response is cool because it shows that it's trained on organizational policies and processes in addition to sort of like the Rally setup components. And I'll show later like how both were accomplished. But we have an app called Lumos where you need to go to get approval for tooling. And then, so it recommended that. And then, the steps to add a user in Rally, which is helpful. But that one was a cool one because this is a research support channel. I hadn't even seen the question. I was actually just tagged in by my director, who then gave kudos for saying, like, because Sydney responded and was like, "Oh yeah, this answers my question. I didn't know that Rally was in the Lumos app. So Leslie, why don't you head there, and then Allison and Maria will approve it." So that was great because it was an immediate answer to like a fairly urgent question, right? And I would have not seen that until the end of the day because I was busy with other things. So I like that example just because it was really like the first question that it answered. And then there's a designer named Tabor on my team who had some trouble getting some prototypes into Listna, which is a tool that we use for usability testing. Um, and the I think this actually ultimately ended up being a bug, but in the case that it wasn't, it gave pretty clear guidance on how he needed to modify his prototypes in order to test well and for, the latency to be good in Listna. So that was a pretty good step by step. And I noticed too that it was being a little bit sort of like scattered in its response, like, it wasn't being consistent with the formatting, so at that point, I went and said I gave it some guidelines around, like, how it needs to answer questions and make sure that it's always sort of step by step, um, and so, yeah, with every response, I kind of went in and modified more to make sure that it was providing a very consistent framework for how it answers questions, um and then here's another example from Shane. These are all in Slack because I deployed the agent to answer questions in our research support Slack channel. And I think, see, I'm having a hard time seeing this with screen sharing, but he made a mistake and he did not enable the consent form when he launched a study. So, this is in Rally. He was wondering if there was a way to have the participants sign the form. Notice that it's like not even mentioning Rally, but it's so well trained on what lives in what tools that it knew, from the context provided, okay, here are the steps to do that in Rally. And so we only facilitate like our consent signage process within Rally, so it knew that, and then it gave him the steps to, manually facilitate that, which I thought was helpful. And then it shows its reference sources at the bottom with an opportunity to provide feedback to help train the model. So yeah, that's kind of an overview of how it's deployed to my stakeholders.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that, Maria. It's really cool to see like real examples of that. I also really like the example you shared of yeah, the one I think it was this one maybe. Let me pull that up again. That it goes like, so I know that your chatbot has access to it's trained on the Rally Help Center, but also obviously trained on your entire research process. So it can go like above and beyond and kind of look at that entire process like outside of Rally and like outside of the tools that you're using and give like the full end-to-end step-by-step process,
Yep.
which is really awesome. And then it's also kind of interesting, like I love that you mentioned, you saw like the first few responses and it's like, okay, now let's go back and refine that prompt or give the bot some more training to know how to like answer
Right.
questions in that step-by-step format. I think it's easy to kind of like be a perfectionist and have that like hold you back of from rolling something like this out, where I think it truly is like an ongoing process of training the chatbot and having it
Right.
practice and learn. So yeah, I'm curious from your perspective, what differences have you seen from like this Slack bot versus the, like, let's say the office hours,
Yeah, that's a good
that
question.
you initially had? Yeah.
Really like the ability to get that instantaneous response. Like it's responding within a minute usually. And with the office hours, that's like a preset time and people weren't attending because everybody wants their questions answered right away. So
Yeah.
what it has done is it cuts down on the number of DMs, not completely, and like I'm still very happy to answer the DMs that I get. Sometimes I actually even use the chat interface. We have a one that doesn't force you to ask questions in Slack. You can go straight to our tool, our vendor Creedle, and ask the questions there if you just select the agent. And so sometimes I'll even ask because it's a quicker way for me to query help docs if I'm not completely sure. I actually didn't post one of my favorite examples, but I didn't want to overuse Shane, but he's been the most active in the channel. And he even asked at one point what the cost of moderation moderated versus unmoderated external recruitment is if he were to use the Rally respondent integration, because he's new to Rally. We just onboarded him, and he wanted to set aside some budget for his study. And so the agent actually responded with the accurate costs and then even like a quantified amount based on the number of participants he was estimating on including. So that was really cool because it did sort of like it pulled from the help docs. I didn't have that answer in my head. I don't have all of these things memorized, but it did that. I would have found myself in the help docs trying to find that to answer his question. And then on top of that, it did the math. And I know that some AIs are not great at math. I'm using a GPT 4.0. I'm actually thinking about changing the foundational model soon, but it does fine. And it's not a super complex question, but I thought that was also a really cool example. And I think that it just prevents the cognitive load. Like if I get slacked that in the middle of trying to do like some more rigorous analysis or, other things I need to do in my day, it just gets distracting. And I think that that's sort of what it helps address. What I will say is that I didn't realize that I could configure the agent until like this week when I was reviewing it again to do follow-ups in the Slack thread. So what we would get was like, it would answer and then that would start, the stakeholder would read the answer and be like, great, I also have like these 5 questions now. And so then I would have to come into the thread and then, answer those questions, but at least one is kind of off the list. So now I've actually enabled the agent to make a decision on whether it should answer in the thread. Like if it has the capacity to answer based on the knowledge that it has, it will start to answer. And I also have the agent configured so that, as you can tell, like Creedle doesn't need to be tagged. Um, it really is, it's just looking for a question mark. And so far that's actually worked really well. I haven't had too many questions come up where people haven't included a question mark. So yeah, it's been
That's
pretty
awesome.
good.
Yeah, that's super smart. I just want to pull up this question just to make sure that we answer it. Where is the
Oh,
chatbot
cool.
listening for
Yeah.
questions like this? This is in Slack, right?
Yeah, so I deployed it to Slack. The tool that I'm using and will show to you all is Creedle. That is a tool that my organization adopted that has an enterprise layer over sort of what you're doing with various AI models. What it, to my understanding, most critically prevents is PII being fed to any model that's been selected, because we cannot have these models trading on PII or like certain proprietary pieces of information as well. So Creedle is that layer, and then it's also provided an interface to set up agents and actions. Agents are what I'm going to demo today, which, it's really kind of a place to, you select a model, you give it like a very specific prompt and context that it pulls from to handle various tasks. So Creedle integrates with Slack, and then the way I had it configured was that it would answer questions in our research support channel.
Yeah, that's perfect. And I love how it's kind of like in the same channel that people are used to. Like they can go to Creedle and use the like chatbot interface, but they don't have to. They can easily ask a
Yeah.
question in Slack, which is what they would be doing anyway if they were DMing you.
Yes.
Awesome. Love it. All right. So I know we have many questions in the chat, but I want to see if we can answer them, some of them, when we actually go through the Creedle
Demo.
side, so the back end. So are you able to just walk us through how
Yeah,
you built this chatbot and what kinds of data sources feed into it?
absolutely. I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully I do this right today. Okay, so what you're seeing is Creedle. And Sydney, if you could confirm, is this window size okay?
Yes, looks good.
Cool. So Creedle is a specific tool or a vendor that we have access to at Checkr. There are other tools, to my understanding, like Glean, and various competitors that other companies may adopt. And I'll get into like some alternatives to Creedle if, Creedle isn't deployed at your organization, but um, Checkr and Creedle are strong partners. We've really helped inform many aspects of the tool, and they've informed so much of our AI practices and standards. And yeah, it's been a really great partnership. So within Creedle, you can create agents. I have several that I've, either been privy to or I'm working on. And the one that I'm going to show today is my user research operations support agent. And that's what's powering what I've already shown in Slack. So really like the key things to call out is the model. Like I said, I started with GPT. I think it really handles a lot of like these sort of like generative questions well. I'm probably going to evolve this to a more updated GPT. GPT-5 is going to take a little bit more time with its response. It's like a real thinker, according to some AI. We have AI solutions engineers at Checkr now, which is great. Um, so now I have a lot more guidance on how, I'm making these decisions, but it's been running on GPT 4.0. I'm probably going to change that soon. Um, Within the agent, you set the creativity to, leaning more creative, balanced, precise. I chose the balanced approach because I wanted it to have the ability to make some of those inferences that were just shown and to be able to handle um, more difficult questions with like a more creative output. But I also wanted it to stay high on accuracy. And I can talk about like how we think about and look for accuracy. Within the prompt, this is the space to define, the agent's role, the goal for the agent, and then context. I'm a little embarrassed showing this context blurb because it's very long, and I'm working on actually getting it out of here and into another doc that I've created, which has our best practices, policies, etc. That doc is a little bit of a better framework because it's organized with headers. It will be easier for the LM to parse. I just haven't had a lot of time to get to that because, as you can see, I'm just running on about our process, which is a little insane. But I'm working on getting that out of here and into the doc because the context window is it's not enormous, like it's very targeted. It doesn't really matter that I have this blurb here. It just makes it a nightmare for people who want to like improve the agent. So that's why it's been a little bit of a backlog item for me. But this part's important where I give it very clear instructions on what it needs to do before it's sharing an output. As much guidance as you can give an agent is better. You can see that I have it set to scan this user research policies at Checkr and best practices for research analysis doc to incorporate any relevant policies and guidelines in the response. I've actually recently learned through a little bit of review that some docs can be pinned so that the LM can consistently scan those and leverage them in its output. I'll talk about that more and why that might be more important, why that may be important in a little bit. But I have it set to default to scanning linked Google Doc files. Again, we'll pin those. And then using most recent updates from the Help Center articles and training guides to ensure current and accurate information. This is, what I was talking about earlier when I noticed that its formatting needed some improvement. So I told it to always guide with clear, actionable steps, preferably in a bulleted list when detailing operational tasks. And then, I've worked a lot with a lot of different AI experts at Checkr on other projects. So I was able to grab some instructions from other projects where I felt they were relevant. And these two are examples of those where, it's a good practice to say that it needs to identify and communicate any gaps in the context that prevent a full answer, prompting the user for additional information if needed. It needs to cite specific information from the context where possible and avoid introducing information not present, which is basically reiterated here. So you have to be like, you kind of have to bully the agent sometimes with the like, do not guess, infer, or make up facts. Like you need to respond with, I don't have enough information to answer this if there's no explicit context provided that answers that question. So I found like I don't know, just with working with various agents, I know this is repetitive, but for some reason that works better. Um, and then I was able to train it on when you're in the Creedle interface for chat, when you select an agent, you'll see suggested questions to ask. And I thought that this part was important because I want people to understand the scope of what this can answer. This agent is not set to query all of our research docs and to give people summaries of research we've conducted at Checkr. There are other ways to get at that through Creedle and agents that we're working on to potentially address that specific solution. But going back to my guidance earlier, I think it's best to keep the scope really focused and to make sure that the context is also focused. I did not want this to be an agent that handles, every single thing that is thrown at us. Like I really wanted it to focus on supporting and unblocking people in research operations. So that's really the goal of this bot, and that's sort of like the suggestion that I give people, the guidance given when they're going into Creedle and selecting this agent. And then I haven't worked with actions yet, but this is sort of where we get into having the agent do things on your behalf. There's a lot of new technology around MCP, you know, started with Anthropic, kind of a framework for integrations where, these agents can actually begin to interact with other agents or facilitate actions on your behalf. And then this part here, the data sources, is important. It's a little messy because I ran into a couple of issues with some websites preventing me from doing like full web crawls, but in most scenarios, I was able to just fully link the Rally Help Center, which it then conducts a web crawl of, and I can set it to go down a specific number of layers. So it'll like click through and then crawl like up to basically 50 different Help Center articles. And then similarly, with Listna, try to do the same thing, but I actually ended up having to do a lot of like individual articles. It tells me when some of these help articles are unhealthy and need to be deleted, so I can make those edits and then update my deployed agent. You can see that I have some of these internal docs that I talked to you all about. You know, I experimented with adding not just like our best practices around operations, but a little bit of context around when to use certain unmoderated methodologies. I don't want this to be a methodology consultation interface, but it does need to have that context when it's making inferences on where to go with specific tooling and how to leverage those tools effectively. So as I was reviewing some responses, I realized that this would be a helpful thing to add. Um, and so, yeah, this basically like this is how I have it configured as far as data sources go. I think it's really inefficient to have these like individual links because as you can tell, like sometimes they change and they go unhealthy. So one thing I commended Rally on was the fact that like somehow I was able to just do the web crawl of your help center. Like I'm not blocked from being able to like I just have that linked and then it updates based on that. So I kind of revisit these as much as I can, and then I add more sources as needed. But again, you want to keep this pretty tight because too many sources can begin to overwhelm and redirect the agent. And I did see that as I added more sources, I then had to add more guidance and context around how to deal with those sources. So, um, that combination of things with training has worked extremely well, and I rarely see issues with the output. I think the issues happen more when folks are asking questions that aren't very clear, or if it's asking the agent to do too many things. So I did have a PM come in and say, like, can you review my study setup in Rally, as well as this research plan, and tell me if I have everything set up correctly? Like, I don't have this agent to go into these tools and do those things. Maybe one day, and I do think that would be an effective very specific use case, like just reviewing things in Rally, kind of being able to refer to how a study is configured. But if anybody here has ideas on how to do that today, let me know. I'm not sure how to do that. I think in the future, though, I think Rally's building towards that future, and we've talked about it a lot. So, um, yeah, it definitely has its limitations, but what it's really good at is scanning these sources in the sort of order that I've asked it. And again, we can like pin these docs to bookmark sources, so that the LM is sort of always scanning that. And then as I deploy changes, I'm going to want to run a bunch of tests, sort of in the space of monitoring it. Creedle has a tab for monitoring, um, and I can review the responses, share feedback, and then, which is really like thumbs up, thumbs down, write in more context, and then debug the message. And I found that incredibly helpful for when I've noticed that it's going off track and I want to kind of like redirect it. Um, yeah, so that's kind of the overview. Um,
That's
yeah, I think
amazing.
I'm gonna stop there for the demo for now.
Yeah, this is really really great and really helpful. I'm curious. You in terms of training this chatbot once it's deployed. So there's what you showed us with the sort of like giving feedback. How else do you train it?
Yeah, so I think there's some guidance that I got from, a solutions engineer in the AI space. He's helping with a lot of our internal AI projects at Checkr, was that it's a pretty good standard to take, like, 10 sample Q&A tests across, like, 3 to 5 models. So when I talk about models, I'm talking about the model that will process the natural language request over here. And you'll want to try to test against 3 metrics, which include accuracy. So are you getting the correct answer? Hallucination. Am I getting partially correct answers with lots of made up extra nonsense? Like that's a problem. And then latency, so what's the wait time look like from overall query to response across these 3 models? So, as you can see, I have the option to kind of like bring in models from OpenAI, Anthropic, Google. Gemini is really exciting. I love using Gemini models. I actually probably wouldn't select that for this kind of task though. Um, like I said, I've like through testing and consultation with our folks at Checkr, I found like the GPTs from OpenAI are pretty good for this. So his order, and this is Alex. If you ever want to connect with Alex at Checkr, Alex Surgeon, his order is to compare families of GPT to Claude. So he'll do, GPT-5 to Claude 4.1 or Opus, or GPT-4 or 4.1 to Claude Sonnet 4. So kind of like the levels from each family, like trying to compare those more directly, compare model generations within the family once you're done with that. So then you're comparing GPT 4.0 to 4.1 versus 5. Um, I'm probably going to switch this one to 4.1 based on some testing that I've done. And then you'll compare model versions within generation. So GPT 4.0 versus 4.0 mini versus Claude 3.5 Sonnet versus Claude 3.5 Haiku. Like these models are constantly coming out and changing, and it's really hard to keep up with like what's good for what. So I think the best thing that you can do is really just like run your own tests, with your own like a sample of your data, ask it consistent questions, really look at the output and think about how you would answer that question and then grade it. And again, you'll want to keep those 3 metrics in mind that we talked about. So accuracy, hallucination, latency.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Maria. And yeah, I feel like it's easy to feel like overwhelmed with all of these options, but I think at the end of the day, like what you've created, obviously a lot has gone into it, but at the same time, it is a pretty low lift to get something like this out and to get people using it. So I think this is really great to see the
Yeah, of
the
course.
real thing. Yeah. So thank you for that demo. We
Yeah.
have quite a bit of questions. So let's
Yeah, I
see.
see that.
I'll try to find some ones that are highly ranked. That's also really helpful for everyone in the chat to be like ranking these with the emojis. It's amazing.
Yeah,
All
that's
right.
great.
So yes, this one from Martin. I'm curious about tracking impact. How have people measured the impact of the bot? How do you know it takes a minute to get an answer and how many people are using it?
Yeah. So I don't know, I didn't show the analytics tab, but we are actually able to see those analytics in a more direct way. Let's see if I share my window correctly. So not a ton of, am I sharing? I don't know if you're sharing or if I'm sharing.
Yes, there we go.
Okay. So like in this particular month, we've only had 3 requests, so not a ton. Um, but you can see the number of requests, the counts of positive feedback, the counts of negative feedback, and overall cost, which I think is it's really cool that Cradle provides that. And then that's kind of a good reference point, as you continue to evolve it to see if those trends are changing and where people are actually interacting. Um, yeah, so that's how I'm doing it. I don't know if that helps answer the question, but I think if obviously not everyone here is going to have Cradle, and we can talk about some alternative options. Um, but you can also sort of like I rarely am checking this tab. I read everything in research support, and I'm kind of like making my own inferences, like, would I've answered this way? Like, did it really answer that person's question? I'll follow up with them. I ask them for feedback. Um, so I mean, that's kind of the way I'm handling this right now.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really interesting. And for you to be able to go in and see like what are people asking and give
Yeah.
feedback on it. I think that's interesting. And yeah, this is sort of in that same vein. A question from Candace: are users able to give feedback directly to the bot to let it know whether the answer worked well for them? And if so, are you finding that it adjusts appropriately based on that feedback?
Yep, absolutely. So, yeah, users are able in Slack or in the Creedle interface to thumbs up, thumbs down, and then provide comments and feedback. And that actually helps train the overall model. I have the agent set so that any user can sort of help train in that fashion. You can set guardrails where like you're really the only person reviewing and training, but I prefer for it to be more of like an more open feedback from everybody and more training from my stakeholders as well. So,
Yeah. Yeah, that's awesome. I just want to pull up this one screenshot because I think you can see at the bottom here that thumbs up, thumbs down, or the X. Yeah, and even like provide feedback. I think that's really great to be able to like allow the people asking the question like whether or not they got the right answer. Perfect. Let's see if there are any other questions about yeah, specifically in the bot. We kind of talked about testing strategy. Let's see. Yeah, so you touched on this a little bit. What limitations are there with the chatbot? I'm curious, Maria, if you have anything else you want to share on this.
absolutely. Um, wish I could pull up. Maybe I'll just try to pull up really quick Sachin's question because I really like how that speaks to the limitations. But I think it's, you know, like I said, like this has a very narrow focus. Like I don't have it set so that I can Slack has its limitations with the integration. If you are actually using the Creedle interface, you can like attach documents for review within an agent. Maybe I should share that a little bit just in case folks are interested in Creedle. But and again, we've really loved working with them. They're great partners to Checkr. I've met the founder actually directly. He's given me time to talk about like my own use cases, which I think is really cool. Um, but in the Criddle interface, you can attach documents. And actually, I'm seeing I don't have that set for my operations agent. But if you're in like the normal chat, you can attach all kinds of things and it can scan those docs and then give you feedback. So I think like it's interesting because I'm working with a lot of other AI tools, such as like Notebook LM. That has been a really cool use case that I would love to share more about sometime to help get more of your stakeholders on board with interacting with your research because they can ask questions in their own time and you can link as many sources as you want. That one's harder to train and guide because they don't really have like an agentic interface for that. But I was thinking that like I really wish Creedle could kind of like pull from those sort of other, I don't know, AI use cases that I've deployed and like actually be able to like deep search within those and search across a lot of the things that I'm publishing. right now I have to like kind of manually link the data sources, which I think is great because you want to keep the context window contained. But I'm still in the process of figuring out how you set up like agent to agent workflows where the bot can actually do things on your behalf. So like one thing we've talked about with the Rally team is, it'd be great to have a future where someone's not just asking to get added to Rally and then to create a study, but like once they ask, that's actually happening in the background on their behalf. So it's just spinning it up for them, giving them sort of the direct link to the study and say, hey, start here, go fill all this out. You're in the tool. You've been approved in Lumos, with that extra step of Allison and myself reviewing, approving. But having those things kind of work in the background, I think would help a lot because those are very manual and tedious tasks. This can't accomplish that today, but I think we're pretty close to that reality. And so it already being trained on all of our process and where we go for what is the most important step, because if we ever get to that point of it running background tasks, I want it to be, you know, very well trained on where we go for what and, how to do those things so that it's not making mistakes and, doing unnecessary background tasks that we didn't ask for.
Yeah.
So that's a limitation.
Yeah. Yeah. That's super interesting. And I think yeah, like one of the questions that we actually, that I saw in the chat somewhere was, obviously the title of our chat today is using AI to elevate research ops leaders and not replace them. So I'm curious, as you're kind of talking through this, like even that, like, the chatbot as it exists today, but even it potentially in the future of it being able to complete actions in the background, how does that impact like your role, or how does it
Yeah.
elevate like what you have time to do on a day-to-day basis?
Right. Yeah, that's a great question. And again, like at Checkr, it's, I'm a senior researcher. We have a staff researcher. We don't have like a formal research ops team. We would love that. But um, because of that, like Allison and myself handle so many operational tasks. And even thinking about the question of like, well, we don't want it to replace research ops fully, like whichever kind of space you're in, like what this enables is time spent on higher value tasks. Like no one's performance review at the end of the year is going to include, I set up that rally study, like I just generated a study for my coworker Tibor to fill out, like you're going to be graded on, in terms of the value you provide to your organization, like what strategic things were implemented because of your work, right? And like I'm reminded of that all the time by my manager because I'm always trying to help people in all these areas. And she's like, try to really focus on the how you're, contributing to our strategy in 2 quarters, like what's on the roadmap because of your research. It's very important that you support all these people, but at the end of the day, that's not what you're graded on in your role. And I think like I don't want AI to replace research ops, but I certainly think we'd all be in a better place if we weren't like spinning up links and, doing really basic stuff for like design and product stakeholders, just because like getting started with the tool is a daunting task for someone. And, we're all like lazy in lots of different ways. Like I don't want to say that my counterparts are lazy because they're not. I have things I'm very lazy about and do not want to do. Um, and it would be nice to have those things taken care of in the background. So I think like it's really about like let's cut down on all of these like small things that we're kind of having to fill our days with and really focusing on like the problem space that we're trying to understand, the strategic projects and things that we're trying to unblock for the organization, for our stakeholders, for our customers and our users, right? So that's sort of how I think about it. And I think that, my guidance earlier was like, keep your agents boring. Like, let's deploy them where there's a really good like a really narrow scope and a really strong problem present, and then test and iterate on that and make sure that it's actually providing some return on investment. Like I'm still evaluating that with my agent, right? But in general, like I've found that it was pretty easy to get implemented and it's doing a lot on my behalf, so I'll keep it around. But I haven't really evolved it in a huge capacity because I haven't really seen a strong need for that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's super interesting. I think it also goes back to the quote that you shared at the beginning of our conversation about um, allowing AI to like do your laundry. Let me pull up that quote
Yes.
in case we had folks join a little bit late. So yeah, I think it's like, what are those administrative tasks that maybe are time consuming for, you know, research ops or senior
Yeah.
researchers that they don't necessarily need to be doing, that those kinds of tasks can be supported by AI. And like you said, that enables you to figure out what are the business objectives that you can contribute to, that when it comes time for, you know, your like annual review, it's like, what are those projects that you had that time and like the brain power to actually sit down and focus on that are like bringing the business forward. Amazing. Yeah, I think that's a really great call out. Um, okay, we only have time for a few more questions, so please, everyone, like continue to share them, and we can also answer some questions later on. Maybe we need a part 2 of this. This is a
Down.
question from Maggie, which is, where do you see the long-term vision of AI agents at your organization? And I know you mentioned a little bit about potentially having agents that can complete actions or like look across, you know, a wide variety of agents that are doing work. So yeah, curious if you have anything else to add here.
That's an interesting question. I'm always really bad at like long-term vision, 5-year plan, that kind of stuff, but I'll try to answer that. And I think what I've noticed at Checkr at least is like we're heavily investing. We've brought on an AI solutions team that is internal facing, so they're helping deploy agents and AI where it makes sense and really helping scoping out some of our problem areas. Um, I don't know if I can speak to Checkr as a whole. I just know that the company is committed and continues to be. Like we've had this generative AI task force that came very early in the conversations about AI. The company's investing a lot of like resources toward it, and not in a capacity that's really meant to replace people. Like they really want people to be strong operators of the technology and know what contexts are appropriate to deploy it in. I think that AI is the hot topic right now, but you know, when we look at the last 10 years of tech, like there have been so many different technologies thrown at us, things are evolving. Like who knows where even AI is going in the next, 5, 10 years. So I think like what's important is to stay up to date with, technology, what solutions make sense. But I think it's really important to stay focused on like proper operational and product development practices. Like I saw a post recently that, someone was calling out like there's been so much buzz about AI that we haven't even talked about the fact that like product development processes need some support. Like we haven't really changed the status quo of product development and the standards there for a long time, right? And so it's like don't let those conversations fall to the wayside. And I think that Checkr's pretty good at making sure that we're remaining focused on the biggest problems for our customers. Um, there's really not like there's obviously a push to consider the technology, but not to push it onto users, whether internal or external, just for the sake of saying that we do AI, right? So I think like I'm going to try to stay with organizations that have that philosophy where it's like we want to enable use of like the most evolved technology and support our employees in doing that. But we also want to be mindful that, these solutions don't make sense in every single context. And you need to be really thoughtful about how you're deploying all of it. We're in a very highly regulated space. So I think that's going to be just with like the legislative stuff coming at, hiring practices, background check practices, like we're going to have to pay attention to that and follow those guidelines. So that'll obviously impact how AI is used at my company. So, the answer is who knows, but I think, like, Checkr really has a good way of kind of, like, responding for the time being.
Totally. Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really good call out, that Checkr, and it seems like you and your team are really like passionate and just aware of what's changing and what's going on. And I think that is like a skill for everybody to keep in mind, is just like that curiosity about what's new, what could we potentially be like integrating into our work days and how. I think, yeah, that's really critical because so much is changing every day with AI, but just with everything around the world.
Yeah, and like sidebar, I'd love to connect with everybody that attended today, but also like other researchers in higher compliance spaces that are trying to deploy these solutions because I know it's hard and I know that we have to think about a lot of things and we want to do everything responsibly. It's kind of hard to know the technology on that level. And so then you feel doubtful, but I'm learning things. I would love to share them and I would really love to hear how other people are addressing that, especially in higher compliance spaces. So
Awesome. Yes. Yeah. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining today. That hour went by so fast. I just dropped your LinkedIn in the chat, Maria. So if anyone has any additional questions that didn't get answered, please, connect with Maria and keep the conversation going. And the
yeah,
other
please
side
do.
note, the other side note that I want to share is that at Rally, we just released our AI philosophy, which kind of is in line with what we were talking about today, that the future of research is human and we're always going to need research ops or research at the center of everything that we do related to AI. So yeah, I just dropped that link in the chat. But thank you everyone so much for being here. That was a really, really helpful conversation. And thank you, Maria.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on.
All right, everybody enjoy the rest of your day.